Join me in welcoming up to the front first-time speaker Wesley Frederick with The Curse of Tippecanoe and Six Dead Guys 2.
Motion, all the country through. It is the ball rolling on for Tippecanoe and Tyler.
That was a little preview of what we're going to talk about. So my name is Wesley Frederick, and I'm totally unqualified to talk about this because I thought it would be a good idea to squeeze 148 years of American history into 10 minutes. So buckle your seatbelts, we're going on a wild ride. As the 9th President of the United States of America, William Henry Harrison left an interesting legacy. He was the first president to die in office. He served the shortest term of any president, only 32 days. And at 8,455 words, he gave the longest inaugural address of any president. And the popular story goes that it was a cold and snowy day in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day, and Harrison didn't wear a hat or a coat for the hour and 45 minutes that it took for him to deliver his speech. And from that, he caught pneumonia and died. But because he's only served 32 days, he wasn't able to keep all the promises in his long speech, but he did keep one. Under no circumstances will I consent to serve a second term. But science offers an alternate explanation for why Harrison died. Looking through the lens of modern epidemiology, it's more likely that Harrison died of typhoid fever from a water supply that was contaminated with fecal matter. Because Washington, D.C. did not have a working sewage system at that point, and there was a large field of night soil only 7 blocks from the water supply. But what if Harrison died for another reason? What if he died from a curse that delivered justice from beyond a grave? And what if the person who delivered that curse was this man, Don Squadadawa, otherwise known as the Prophet? In 1936, Harrison ran a failed presidential bid, and supposedly during that year, because we're dealing with a folklore here, the prophet said, Harrison won't win this time to be great chief, but he may the next. And if he does, he will not finish his term. He will die in office, and when he does, you will remember my brother. I've not lost my powers. I who caused the sun to darken and the red men to give up fire water, I tell you, Harrison will die. So who's this brother that needs to be remembered? And did the prophet actually have the powers to block out the sun? And why would a Shawanese prophet curse Harrison in the first place? Well, to answer these questions, we have to go all the way back to 1800, when Harrison was the governor of the Indiana Territory. He was ambitious, and as governor, this was only a stopping point to something bigger in his career. But in order to get there, he needed to make sure Indiana became a state. But in order for Indiana to become a state, he had to attract white settlers with the promise of cheap land. Unfortunately, there were lots of Indians living on that land, Indiana literally meaning the land of Indians. But Harrison devised a bunch of not so honorable tactics to divide and conquer and purchase large swaths of land. And he got so good at it for the 13 years from 1800 to 1813 that he was governor. He was able to sign 13 treaties that turned over 60 million acres of land, which is approximately the size of Oregon. And it was in 1806 that that Harrison first heard about the prophet. And the prophet started preaching a new religion, that the Indians were one nation, that they should return to their roots, they should give up the white ways, including drinking and white ways of farming, and that all land was owned in common by the Indians. Harrison issued a challenge to the prophet and his followers, said, ask him to produce a miracle. Ask him to cause the sun to stand still. So the prophet heard that, went out to his followers and said, okay, 50 days from now, the Great Spirit will take the sun and hide it from us. And 50 days later, on June 16th, 1806, there was a total solar eclipse. Oddly enough, there are some theories around how he knew how to do that, and science might be part of it. But this brought a lot of Native Americans to the Prophet's cause. And in 1808, the Prophet and his half-brother Tecumseh founded the pan-Indian city of Tippecanoe, which the whites called Prophetstown. Now, Tecumseh was a great warrior and tactician. Harrison went so far as to praise his talents. And Prophetstown, at its peak, had about 6,000 Native Americans, many of them warriors from all sorts of different tribes. And at the time, it was the largest city west of the Appalachians, if you don't include New Orleans. So that was a problem for Harrison, but also a problem for Harrison was in 1809, his opponents to his pro-slavery laws and his autocratic governing methods managed to split off Illinois, the Illinois Territory, from Indiana. And the 1810 census was the next year, so Harrison had a problem because he didn't have a large enough population for Indiana to become a state. So his solution, buy more land, attract more white settlers. He invited the chiefs of the Miami tribe, plied them with 218 gallons of alcohol that was all consumed in one night. And from that, the Treaty of Fort Wayne was produced, which handed over 2.5 million acres of land that was claimed by various tribes, land that sat right on the border of Prophetstown, which annoyed Tecumseh and the Prophet. This is a picture of Tecumseh being annoyed. And that's Harrison being annoyed back. Harrison was so annoyed that he knew he had to do something about Prophetstown. So he decided he was going to march north and burn Prophetstown to the ground. And this is a sort of talk that Harrison liked to give. He said, a powerful nation rendering justice to a petty tribe of savages is a sublime spectacle. So he was hoping for a sublime spectacle. Yes, not necessarily the hero. But Harrison was a politician. He wasn't really a military genius. So probably the triumph of his campaign of Prophetstown was building a fort and naming it after himself. The low point of his campaign was making camp 2 miles from Prophetstown and failing to give the orders to build defenses because, quote, he didn't think he needed them. Well, on the morning of November 7th, 1811, the Native Americans of Prophetstown took advantage of that and began the Battle of Tippecanoe. And the battle only ended when the Native Americans ran out of ammunition. And at the end of the battle, the Americans suffered 200 casualties with 60 dead, and the Native Americans suffered 80 casualties with 50 dead. So it wasn't a resounding victory. And the Native Americans retreated to Prophetstown, and the Prophet evacuated Prophetstown. And the next day, Harrison marched into Prophetstown, took it, burned it to the ground, burned the winter crops, marched back to Vicente as the capital, and started bragging about what a good job he had done. But the thing is, the aftermath, it didn't really do a lot. The Native Americans simply rebuilt Prophetstown. Actually, it increased frontier violence. It showed the Native Americans that they couldn't trust the U.S. federal government. And eventually, it drove the Native Americans to side with the British in the 1812 war. And in that war, in 1813, at the Battle of the Thames, Tecumseh was killed. And when Tecumseh died, that actually dissolved the Pan-Indian alliance that occurred. So Harrison used this, and he used his reputation on how to treat Indians, which was essentially murdering them and buying their land, to propel his own political career. Well, fast forward to 1840. Harrison has already tried to run, failed. The Whigs have put him up again to run against Martin Van Buren, who the Democrats have put up. The Democrats think they have him beat. They start making fun of his political career and his frontier past, and one of their newspaper writes about him, "Give him a barrel of hard cider and settle a pension of $2,000 a year on him, and take my word for it, he will sit the remainder of his days in a log cabin." Well, Harrison was not a salt-of-the-earth frontiersman. He was born to a prominent Virginian family. That's his father's signature on the Declaration of Independence, right below Thomas Jefferson's. And he didn't live in a log cabin. He lived in a Southern-style plantation house, complete with slave quarters in the back. However, the Whigs jumped on this, and they framed the election as the blue blood elite Van Buren versus the down-home military hero Harrison. It was the first example of public image making in politics, and the supporters went all out. They pushed a 10-foot paper and tin ball emblazoned with slogans for hundreds of miles, giving us the phrase, "Keep the ball rolling." They distributed whiskey in log cabin bottles supplied by the EC Booze Distillery, giving us the word booze. But mostly they promoted Harrison's military history, specifically the Battle of Tippecanoe. They called him Tippecanoe, or Old Tip, and it gave birth to the first campaign slogan, "Tippecanoe and Tyler too," which was also a very popular song, one of the most popular political songs ever. And the song you heard as I walked up was They Might Be Giants covering it, and they called it the "I Want to Hold Your Hand" of campaign songs. So with Harrison making his presidency, being president because of how he slaughtered Native Americans and stole their land, it's no wonder that the prophet's curse took hold in 1841 and killed him. But curses are odd things, and I know that this is a room full of smart people, so maybe you can point out this pattern to me. Harrison was elected in 1840, dies. Abraham Lincoln is elected in 1860, assassinated in office. James A. Garfield is elected in 1880, assassinated in office. William McKinley is re-elected in 1900, assassinated in office. Warren G. Harding, elected in 1920, dies in office. FDR, re-elected for a third term in 1940, dies in office. John F. Kennedy, elected in 1960, assassinated in office. So can anyone pick up the pattern? They're all white guys. While true, there were previous white guys who didn't fall into this pattern, so you do not win our prize. But yes, every president after Harrison who was elected in a year ending in 0, or every president elected 20 years after Harrison died in office. So along comes Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan got lucky. He dodged the bullet. I mean, he dodged the curse. The bullet got him, but he was able to survive and live out the rest of his days through his administration. I know, right? So I think Ronald Reagan broke the curse. It turns out that of the 8 presidents who have died in office, 7 of them were tied to this 20-year curse. Only Zachary Taylor, who was born in 1848 and died in 1850, was the lone exception. So why would this curse affect the presidents in 20-year cycles? Well, the astrologers who investigated the curse after Ronald Reagan's death Yes, I said astrologers, not astronomers, but that's okay. You guys have been drinking right now. Science-ish. You know, Nancy Reagan was a big proponent of astrology, so it seems related. They said that it was the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn that was the cause, and that happened every 20 years. And it's not unthinkable to think that a prophet who could block the sun out of the sky couldn't tie the power of his curse to the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn. But why would the curse break with Ronald Reagan? And here... Well spoken, sir. Well, here's my theory. Of all of those presidencies, of all those administrations that fell in that 20-year cycle, and this is gonna be hard to stomach, but Reagan, out of all of them, did more to align the federal government with the prophet's vision than anyone that came before him. Now listen to this. In his effort to slash the federal budget, he wanted to decrease the U.S. government's responsibility to the Native Americans. So he took several crucial steps to accelerate the process of reservation self-government, self-sufficiency, and self-determination. One of them was that he raised the recognition of Indian tribes to a government-to-government basis so that they no longer had to listen to the states that their land was in. And in 1988, he signed into law the Indian Gaming Act, which for the first time gave Native Americans the economic power to self-determine their own future. So even though he probably didn't mean it, Reagan's policies actually brought the federal government more in line with the prophet's vision of one Native American nation that was independent of the U.S. federal government. So there you go. So let's raise a glass to the prophet who delivered a curse of justice that decided to take its own sweet time. It lasted 120 years, had a power over 148. Here's to justice.
Awesome. Give it up one more time for Wesley Frederick. He's a first-time speaker. All right.